Teaching was her first love, and she taught special education for almost 40 years. When she retired, she started researching Annie Sullivan, and having always had a theater bug, Colette now shares Annie's story by portraying Annie herself. As many of you probably know, Annie Sullivan was Helen Keller's teacher, and Helen Keller famously had many obstacles to overcome. Maybe you didn't know, though, Annie Sullivan had some to overcome herself. She had a pretty bleak childhood. So if you'll sit back, we will soon meet Annie Sullivan, and we'll learn more about her life.
It's all those buttons, you know. Alone, all alone, by the wave was strand, and alone in the crowded hall. The hall, it is gay, and the waves, they are grand, but my heart is not here at all. It lies far away by night and by day, to the times and the joys that are gone. But I never will forget the sweet maiden I met in the valley by Sullivan. Well, hello there. I heard my name mentioned backstage there. I'm Annie Sullivan, Helen Keller's teacher. Now there's a teacher from somewhere in your life story that lingers in your mind. Teacher, yes. Well, some seem celestial beings, and others seem cast from a dark realm. I bet in the end they illumine your way. If I were a teacher in these times, well, being I was such a spitfire, I would have been chastised, not lauded. Do you know that they called me Miss Spitfire all the way back to Tewksbury, the almshouse I was sent to at the age of 10 with me brother Jimmy? You see, Mother had died when I was 8, and my da, well, he liked the drink, and his drink mates too much to care for much else. So for all intents and purposes, we were orphans. And while me being so spirited, and my brother being so sickly, well, in the end, kinfolk found little room in their homes for us, and no room in their hearts either. Well, anyways, I'll have to tell you this part here. My aunt told us, she said, we're going to go on a carriage ride. And I got quite excited, because I'd never been on a carriage ride, and I thought, I betcha that we're going to go to Boston. Da had talked about Boston and what a grand big city it was, and I'm thinking, this will be grand. And then I wondered, maybe the carriage would take us to the sea, and maybe we'd get on a boat, and maybe we'd go back to Ireland. Dad told us about Ireland, and about the wee little people that lived in the forest and how rainbows appeared, and I had a granny back there. So I'm thinking, well, this carriage ride's a good thing. I get to go see my granny, my brother and I. Well, that's not where we went at all. I suppose you've heard what an almshouse is, right? Well, they took us to the Tewksbury almshouse. Back in the day, you know, they had nothing for us. There weren't any social services or anything like that, so they just had this great big building. And we went up this great big hill. Well, in the building, they had paupers, and they had prostitutes, and they had a lot of immigrants and pregnant women and crazy people all strewn up together in this great big building. And it didn't matter if you're a child or what. Well, we get to this building, and they said, you're going to live here. And they said that my brother was going to go to the men's side. He was just 8 years old. And they told me I was to go to the women's side. I made a terrible fierce fit and I said, "You're not going to separate me from my brother." Well, they let him stay by my side, and that gives me some great comfort. Because just a few months later, it was there in the Tewksbury that he died. So you can understand why I didn't want Helen all to know about this. Well, I would have never escaped Tewksbury myself had I not been such a spitfire, right? But one day, I had heard that the governor of Massachusetts had heard about the conditions at this asylum, and he sent out all these men in their suits to check on the place. Of course, the rats went hiding, you know. Well, anyways, they're cavorting through the place, and I skulked around behind him, and then when I found an opportune moment, I threw myself in their midst, and I said, "Oh, help me, I'm blind, I can't see." And they took pity on me, and they sent me to the Perkins School for the Blind. And that was the beginning of my life getting a little better. Now, everyone wants to know about Helen, and I'm sure you're very interested in me, but I'm here today, in particular, to speak about the day that Helen met me, March the 3rd, 1887. And the reason I bring this up is she was quoted as saying, "The day I met my teacher was the day of my soul's birthday." Annie Sullivan. But the truth of the matter is not what I tell you about it, but the truth of the matter is what you understand about it, what you divine about it. But this is the story. This idea of a soul's birthday was Helen's alone. I never took much bother with that idea. All snake oil and spiritualism, and I had my fill of religion back in the asylum, if you know what I mean. I couldn't Hail Mary myself out of there for nothing. And I'm sure you must be thinking, when I speak of the soul's birthday, I bet you're thinking, that one stayed too long in that loony bin. But I repeat to you, this idea was Helen's alone. But even before I boarded that infernal train ride from Massachusetts down to Alabama, I understood prisons. And I knew that locked inside was the wee lass herself. And I want you to think about this. You don't have to say it out loud. But I'm just wondering, is there a hidden part of you? A part that you keep deep down inside, and you just never told any about it because you didn't want to be ridiculed or chastised for having that little dream? I just always wanted to do a cartwheel. You know, it's so simple. But I didn't understand my meaning. We all have a place that we keep inside, and I don't think we're much different than these children. Does anybody want to share theirs? Maybe there's a tap dancer amongst us, I don't know. And I'm wondering here today, as I look out at everybody who's had to brave the elements to be here, I wonder if we have any teachers in our midst today. Well, you know how it goes, teachers. If you're a teacher, please raise your hand. Oh, please help me here. I have a few hands up there. I don't ever become an ex-teacher. I've seen you in the grocery store telling those children to line up. Yes, there are no exes. How about you? Could you tell us what you taught?
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten.
Yeah, the little ones.
And you still have that nice voice. You don't talk like this now. How many years did you teach kindergarten?
Maybe 20.
20 years. Well, I just want to ask everyone, for these teachers, whether they put their hand up high or not, could we give them a big round of applause? Where would the world be without teachers? You know? I'm also wondering today, because I've been thinking about this conversation I like to have with you. I'm wondering if there's any grandparents here. You laugh, you know, but I think right away when I mentioned this idea of grandparents, coupled with this idea of soul's birthday, I think you know that you're in the unique position to care for the souls of little ones in a very different way. Am I not right? And I think about my own granny that I never met in Ireland. And that just makes my soul quicken, because sometimes I can hear her in my head even though I never met her. I'll hear a certain melody and there's my grandmother somewhere in my mind, you know. So my point of all this is this idea of a soul's birthday. Anyways, I go on so about this idea, but I remind you that it was Helen that began this whole grand idea of a soul's birthday. Well, I'm sure you want to hear more about Helen. Just like all those folks who came to see us do vaudeville. Let me check something though, now that I've mentioned vaudeville. Sound check, can you hear me all right? I've never ever been told that my voice was not big enough. I said, oh, you can turn the contraption off. Yes, as a matter of fact, yes. Anyways, Helen and I did vaudeville, and it was quite the event. It was one of Helen's schemes to address her financial woes, our financial woes. And people all over the country were intrigued about Helen Keller. The newspapers had been filled with stories about this amazing, miraculous young woman who could speak with her hands and her fingers. And they'd put it in the newspapers, and then people would queue up all around the theater. And then after the actors and the musicians, and you know the theater type, right? And there's Helen and I, East Coast proper women. But anyways, we would take our place into the floodlights. And I'd be spilling into her sweet, soft palm, or she'd be spilling into mine. But then from some force within, she found voice. She spoke. It was miraculous. But it is my great regret. The doctors later said that she didn't have as much use of her voice due to improper technique, because I pushed her too hard in that realm. And it is my great regret. And Helen always gave me too much credit. She never mentioned any of that. But anyways, she was writing a book about me, her teacher, you know. And the original burned in the fire. And if you asked me, that was providential. Because I didn't like her chatting me up and such. But she was committed to that book. She was committed to that book. And I suppose if you understand me, her teacher, then you might understand Helen a bit more. Because Mark Twain said when he met us, he said, well, those two are just half of the same whole, he said. Us half of the same whole. But anyways, I do think that I've kept silent too long. I'm concerned about children, and I've seen such a hunger for knowledge and freedom in some sense. So I want to speak a bit, not just for Helen like I did so often with my fingers and with my voice, but to speak on behalf of all children. And as I told you, I'm not much for religion and such, but I believe in Helen's message. And if we tend to that inside, that interior, I just think things will be different. And I'm not saying that I'm a particularly special woman, but I'm wanting you to understand her philosophy, her ideas. Now, Helen only ever called me teacher. Teacher, T-E-A-C-H-E-R. Annie the girl from the almshouse. That's what everyone else called me. Annie, Miss Anne. But she called me teacher. Once I was called teacher, I never wanted to be called anything else. It felt like a sacred honor, like being knighted or something, you know. You're a teacher. Teacher, if you look it up in the Webster's It says, it's a work that refers to responsibility with a particular skill set. Teacher. The new physics teacher used to be a nun. Teacher is an educator, a preceptor, a coach, a guru, a don, a guide, a master, a mistress, a governess, a preceptor, a coach, a trainer, a lecturer, a professor, a don, a guide, a mentor, and a guru. And then, back in the day, I was a school marm. Anyways, once I was called teacher, I never wanted to be anything else. And as I showed you earlier, as soon as I said that word teacher, this mind movie starts for you in your own mind. They're printed in there. You can hear them. And as I was Helen's first teacher, and more stubborn than she really, well, that's how this all came to be. But I have to tell you, when I first met that disheveled, uncivilized child, darting about, grabbing things from plates, well, I near bolted. But I had lived in an asylum, and I knew that locked inside was the wee lass herself. So I understood. Now I want to tell you a little bit more about me. So I told you how I got out of the asylum and went to the Perkins School. Well, it's quite a long story here, so let me settle in for a bit. You know we storyteller types. But if you can't hear me, see me, raise your hand and I'll get tall again, no problem. So anyways, when I got to the Perkins School for the Blind, well, I couldn't see much, right? And I'm a spirited girl, but what people don't know about me is that I couldn't read or write. I couldn't even sign my own name. And I'm 14 years old. Well, and also I have to tell you a bit about the history of the Perkins School for the Blind. Did you ever hear of a man called Samuel Gridley Howe? Well, he was a great abolitionist and a great thinker. And he actually had heard about the work that was going on international, and he set the school up in his basement. And the school grew, and people took great interest in it, and it grew into this lovely set school. What I like to tell about, we have a lot of women here, you know, today. Did you know who his wife was? Well, his wife was the woman that wrote the lyrics to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Think about that. Mine eyes have seen the glory. Mine eyes have seen. I just always have quit taking with that. Well, anyways, I get to this beautiful school. It's like nothing you've ever seen before. And I'm like nothing they've ever seen before, too. So I get to this school. Well, I didn't know a thing. I couldn't read, I couldn't write, and certainly I didn't know how to act like a lady. But I did have a wonderful, wonderful house mother there, and her name was Mrs. Sophia Hopkins. And she made it her business to teach me how to sit and act and chew proper and keep my mouth shut and put my hand on my lap and all those things. But I have to tell you, the school was primarily filled with girls and boys of the wealthy East Coast. So to them, they kept me right there in the prison. They didn't want a thing to do with me. I was the orphan pauper child of an Irish immigrant who had lived in an asylum that didn't know how to act. So they wanted nothing to do with me. So it's the bad become good, because at the Perkins School for the Blind, there was this woman named Laura Bridgman. And Laura Bridgman was the first woman in the entire United States of America to learn to speak with her fingers by signing. And me being a talker, well, I sat right down next to her, and she's the person that taught me to sign, and we became grand friends. So life progressed there. I want to tell you, so life progressed there and life goes on and I began to learn. But now this is not some place you can stay forever. So now I'm 18 years old and I'm supposed to go out into the world. It's time, right? Well, where do you think they thought I should get a career at? Well, just the same place all my ancestors thrived, as a housemaid. Now, I told you I was a Spitfire, right? So that means I have no natural inclination to bowing. And the other thing I told you is that I'm blind almost, right? I had many, many surgeries to my eyes and I could barely see. And back in the day, you know, you take that iron and you'd put it on the fire and you'd put it on the collar. Well, 1 or 2 collars later, they shooed me right back to the Perkins. So now there's a problem. They've got me at the Perkins and they don't know what to do with me, and I really don't know what to do myself. This is a scary place, the world, for me. A terrifying place. Well, the backstory to the whole way that I came to be Helen Keller's teacher is quite intriguing. So down there in Alabama, and this is just after the Civil War, and down in Alabama, at her home, Mrs. Keller is reading the newspaper, and she reads the writings of a man named Dickens, who happens to be visiting in the United States. And what he's writing is this whole column about the American travels. And she reads this, and she reads in the article, well, there's a school up east, and they teach blind children. And she's got this daughter there, Helen, that's deaf and blind. Now, we don't talk much about Mrs. Keller. We all know about Helen, but here's a woman, post-Civil War, in the Deep South, when the whole entire country and the world thinks the only place for the deaf-blind is in an asylum. And she says, I'm not sending my daughter there. I'm keeping her. And then she says to her husband, like only a wife can say, darling, we need to get a teacher for this girl. And him being a dutiful husband and a smart man, he went about following up on this article. And what I think is intriguing is he corresponded with Alexander Graham Bell. Now, Alexander Graham Bell, who can tell me what he invented? Oh, now we might have to have a little school here. What did he invent? Just shout it out. That's correct. But did you know about his wife? Alexander Graham Bell's wife, Mabel, she couldn't hear a thing. So this amplification of voice, if you ask me, it was a love story, right? He wanted to be able to talk to his beloved. Well, anyways, all this correspondence is going on, and they make a plan for me, Annie Sullivan, to become Helen Keller's teacher. And they arrange for me to go from the north down to the south. And I have to tell you, it was terrifying, because, you know, there was all this rumor about the South and the types of people they were, and I hadn't lived anything. I had never lived in a real home, you know. But anyways, I studied the records and I practiced for 6 months, and then I took that train ride with destiny. And I traveled from the north down to the deep south to meet my charge, Helen Keller. Well, you never saw such a sight as this. So I go into the house, and she's all over the place and grabbing stuff and doing stuff. And I have to tell you, she said the day that she met me was the day of her soul's birthday. Well, I'm telling you, it was a breech birth. Indeed. And also, if I'm Miss Spitfire, well, she was Miss Volcano. She was fierce, explosive, passionate, real, and over everything in her midst. But inside was this person locked in. And my job was not to make her be what I thought she should be, but find her essence. And she loved to be out in nature and look about and see everything. So what I did was I rather followed her nature about. Well, anyways, I followed her about and I'm signing and we're trying so hard because I knew that if she could get language, if she had a way to communicate, I understood that. It's like me being a Spitfire. If I didn't make all that noise, you think they were going to let Jimmy stay with me? No, they weren't. And all of her behaviors are just because she can't share it with us. So anyways, now I'm the teacher and I have to teach her that these things mean something. I don't know, it's she talks about her soul's birthday. But to me, this was the christening day. And we went out to the well. And she was very thirsty because we're in Alabama and we'd been signing and chasing all over the garden all day long. And she wanted a bit of that water. And I just pulled her right back and I started signing. And she, being stubborn like, she went right back at that water and I just kept spelling it. W-A-T-E-R. She wanted that water and she's not getting it. And I spelled it. And I don't know how you see a light in the eyes of a blind person, but all of a sudden this light went on. And you could tell that she got it. W-A-T-E-R-W-A. And that was the beginning. That was the key. Language for her was the key. And in my opinion, if you care to know, I think it's sort of the key to every child, giving them a system with which they can share their interior. Tell us, Anyways, we went about and followed that scent of learning. And what a journey that was. What a journey that was. Well, anyways, she called me teacher. And I didn't look or act much like a teacher. But I did follow that scent of learning. Well, Helen went on to learn and learn. And then she decided she wanted to go to college. She wanted to go to college, but she not only wanted to go to college, she had it in her mind. She was going to go to Radcliffe. Now, Radcliffe was the sister school to Harvard. All right. Now, Radcliffe, they said, no, we don't want you. Well, Helen being Helen, she didn't run right off and enroll into those other universities that said we'd love to have you. She says, I'm going to Radcliffe, and she was relentless in that pursuit until they let her in. And when she graduated from Radcliffe, she was fluent in 5 languages: French, German, Greek, Latin, and Italian. I believe I have that right. But also, she spoke with her fingers. And that's a language in and of itself, right? Anyways, this tells you a lot about her, how fierce she was. And I have to tell you, me as being her teacher, I had a few laudits put on myself, I was at a function very much like this. And this very lovely Italian woman, Dr. Maria Montessori, was up at the podium speaking. And we're sitting out there in the audience listening to her. They brought her in as the keynote speaker at some foundation or other about education. And I'm sitting out there, and she points out there at me. And I'm thinking, oh no, the asparagus is still sitting in my teeth. And she points out at me and she says, if you're looking for your pioneer, there's your pioneer. Me, Annie Sullivan. Maria Montessori said I was the pioneer of education. And then I was at another function. And who do I meet but the Nobel laureate, Dr. Albert Einstein? Well, he comes up to me and he takes the hold of my hand and he's looking up at me. And he says, your work, Mrs. Macy, has intrigued me more than anything in modern education. Not only did you impart language on the girl, but it has an element of the divine as you unfurled her personality. Albert Einstein saying this to me. Glory be. I can't even imagine. I wished my mother was there that day. I wished my mother was there that day. Anyways, back to what I'm here to speak of. I do think that Helen would be a bit concerned that we're not doing enough to nourish the spirits of children. Children who are lost to television or a curriculum that says everybody's got to do the same thing all the time. I was writing with a little girl this week, and she had to do rhyming words. And she was supposed to rhyme something like a hen. And I'm thinking, I don't know in the projects where she lives if she's ever even seen a chicken. So what's she know about a hen? Glory be. Anyways, I believe we have to make room for them to explore so that they can touch and smell and see the chrysalis of a butterfly. Children naturally dwell in a mystical land. Helen showed me that. But if we neglect to ask, who is this being? Who is my charge? I think they just furtively hide from us. And as a result, their hungry spirit hides further and further inside, and yet we continue to offer more of the same. Mashed potatoes, green beans, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, very tasty. But not taking into account the individual nutritional needs. So I think we need to ask deeper questions about education. Now, it is true that Helen, like all children, had a need of a form, structure to her life, and we gave her that. But we have to be very, very wary of not snuffing out the fires of these children. Imagine. There's no imagining, really. I'm guessing that everybody out there knows one child, one person where we didn't find that key. And they kind of went missing to us because we kept trying to make them be what we thought they should be, rather than saying, well, who are you at your core? Who are you at your core? And then they just go far, far away. And they have lots of ways that they tell us that we're not meeting them. And you've seen it yourself. It's a very sad story. I go on, and I always apologize for it. But if there's one Helen, there's one more Helen, and there's one more, and there's one more, and no other child needs to be treated any different than she is. We all hold her in high regard and esteem as being some sort of miracle. The miracle is that who she was allowed to be part of who she became. Well, anyways, I'm such a preacher. If I hadn't been a teacher, I would have been a preacher. And if you're a teacher, you know what I mean. So, anyways, there's many, many more chapters to our story. Lots of lovely chapters, and you can learn just about everything you want to know. It's all in videos and YouTubes. We traveled the world over. I was her companion until the day I died. And she made it her business to take care of me, and I never had a want. We met many famous people, and we saw the world. She wrote many books. We both had great loves. And we both had great loves lost. Movies were made of us. There was even, I don't know if you know it, a movie called Deliverance. It was. And it was a great big Busby Berkeley affair. They have Helen dressed up as Joan of Arc and music and all this. And an intriguing little side note about that movie, we're going to the premiere. It's like the Oscars, and we're going to go see our movie, and she's in it. And out front are these people, and they're holding these signs, And they're marching up and down and up and down, and they're picketing the movie. Well, Helen says, what's this all about? Well, apparently, during the filming of the movie, the workers on the movie hadn't been treated so well, and so now they're picketing because they didn't get a fair wage and work too many hours. Well, Helen heard about this, and do you know what she did? She picked up a sign, and there we are, marching up and down in front of our own premier. There you go. But you see, that's the kind of person that she was. Is that once she had a voice, she spoke on behalf of others and was ceaseless in that. She was very, very affiliated with the American Federation for the Blind and began the event. And of a note to me is that the Lions Club, where they have leader dogs. Helen and I always had dogs. We had, I think, 25 dogs, if you can count past 25 when it comes to dogs. But anyways, she was the person that's actually responsible for the Lions Club's support of leader dogs. She gave a keynote speech to them and asked them to please take up this cause of the blind. Anyways, there are stories and stories and stories that I could tell you, but you can find all you want on the internet. There's even a Bollywood version of our story. I just want to get back to the key point, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir on this one. So mostly I think I want to acknowledge people who are here today. You're here today because you're lifelong learners. And I have the sense as I look about this room that there are people who are doing everything they can to make their community a better place. But I just want to go on note that being a teacher, being a parent, being a grandparent, being a friend, it's not much different than being an archaeologist. You have to do a bit of excavating to find out who people are at their core. And they won't always show themselves right away. And then, of course, there's creativity. And I like to have a moment thinking about creativity. When we were on the circuit doing vaudeville, well, there was this most luscious, spirited actress, Kate. And oh, they lined up to see her as well, I'm telling you. Well, I recently got a correspondence from her. And she's out in the normal school in San Francisco. And she wrote me a letter of correspondence, and she said, oh, Miss Ann, she said, I'm concerned about schools and children. She said, if we take the art out of heart, what do we have? Absolutely nothing, she says. So we have to make sure that we keep these things going. Well, I've done a lot of prattling here. And I wish I could bring Helen here to be with you, but the best I can do is show you a little video of her. So I'm going over here to my audio-visual, they call it. I thought I was audio-visual enough, but I want to be able to share my beloved charge with you. So be patient with me for a minute. Actually, don't be patient. I'm not really a fan of patience. But while I'm getting this ready, would you turn to someone near you and share for a moment and honor that person who is perhaps your soul's teacher, or someone who you, or speak to the person who you know that you're their soul teacher. So I'm going to repeat that. Just share with a friend, either or a neighbor, who was your soul's teacher, or is there someone in your life now that you're really aiming to be a soul teacher for? And just take a moment while I prepare this little film clip for you.
For 2 years, Helen and her teacher trooped the vaudeville circuit up and down the land, earning their daily bread. A part of their so-called act was later filmed. It is the only existing record of Annie Sullivan's voice.
When I saw Helen first, she was 6 years and 8 months old. She had been blind and deaf and mute since her 19th month as the result of an illness. She had no way of communicating with those around her except a few imitated signs that she had made for herself. A push meant go, pull meant come, and so on. She had observed that we did not use the hand when we were talking to each other. And I let her see, by putting her hands on my face, how we talk with our mouths. She felt the vibration of the spoken word. Instantly, she felt, I want to talk with my mouth. That seemed impossible. But after experimenting for a time, we found that placing her hand in this position, the thumb resting on the throat, right at the larynx, the first finger on the lip, the second on the nose, we found that she could feel the vibration of spoken words. For instance, the throat, she feels the G, the hard G, the. And on the lips, she feels and the K sound. On the lips, she feels the B, and with the second finger on the nose, the nasal sound, the 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 first word she learned to articulate was the little word it. With the hand in this position, I made the vowel I. She felt it. I. Then I made the T. She feels it with the finger on her lips, on my lips. Then I put the two letters together to form the word it. And the first word was learned. After her seventh lesson, she was able to speak the sentence word by word. I am not now.
So I just want to end with wanting to say that in my life, it was a great and sacred honor to be a teacher. And I feel very honored that I have an opportunity to continue to carry this message. And I couldn't say it better. I was a teacher for 40 years. And of course, the way things work, I had two children that had their own unique stories and needed a certain kind of a hand. And I was very much like Annie Sullivan. I was very much a Spitfire that didn't fit. And so that's why I'm here today, because I think that if we don't figure things out and show up for those kids, that the world suffers greatly. So I'm, as a teacher and as a mom and a sibling, I just want to urge everyone and affirm everyone who is working to listen with their eyes and listen with their ears and their skin and their heart. And just please know that children do have an interior. And may you find each child's key. And may you aim to always care for the soul, and all else will follow. So thank you very much for having me. I need to shut that. Sorry. Oh, so nice. I will take questions. Let me make this go away, though. All right, thank you. All right, I can take a few questions. What was that building? I'm not sure what any buildings are on there. I just, that wasn't Tewksbury. That was not Tewksbury. Tewksbury is amazing to me. You can Google it, you can find it. And I actually went in there and they have an archive of the people that are buried there. Somebody archived all the family names. And I found my Irish ancestors' names in the archive of who's buried there. So, and there's lots of people buried at Tewksbury. So, anyways, sorry, that was my aside. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is Tewksbury in Ireland?
No, Tewksbury, I'm sorry, and that's a great question. So I maybe need to make that clear that it's a state hospital in Massachusetts. So thank you for making sure that next time I speak I make that more clear. Tweksbury. You know, and on that note, I'll just share a little side note that there's very little footage of Annie Sullivan's voice. But you heard in this video, she's not speaking in an accent at all. But my understanding of her in the Times is because of her public position and because of the lack of regard for her culture of origin, that she would never have wanted people to know she had Irish ancestry. And so I made a decision, because that would have been what she heard growing up. She would have heard her family was first generation Irish, and she would have had some of that naturally in her voice. So that's a decision I've made as an actor and a person. So we have a question in the back.
Yes, it's not a question, it's a comment. I belong to the Troy Community Lions Club, and in 1925, Helen Keller did approach the Lions and ask them to be Knights of the Blind. They took up that challenge, and to this day, they carry out that challenge to try and do whatever they can to cure preventable blindness. And they are very proactive in supporting things like Leader Dogs for the Blind, Pendleton School, for the blind and multiple handicapped. It's out in Taylor, and many other activities of that nature. And if anybody wants any information on joining, we're always looking for new members. We are a service organization, the largest service organization I've been told in the world. We have 1,300,000 members worldwide in over 200 countries.
Thank you for doing that. Please, anybody if you're looking after this thing, want to work on that behalf, I can't think of a better organization. One of the things that is intriguing to me, Annie Sullivan, I may say it wrong, she had trachomia of the eyes. And it's the most preventable type of blindness that there is. And all over the world, that people are not getting the treatment, and people who it's an unnecessary blindness. And so I believe the Lions they're working very hard internationally to prevent blindness through it's a series of eye drops that are unavailable to people in the rest of the world and third world. Yes, ma'am.
I have 20/20 vision looking at you because I've had 2 cataract surgeries, and I'm sure there are many here who've had the cataract surgery. I was going blind with both, not going blind, but just very, very hard to see when I was driving and reading, and I used the readers for some post-work. But in our day and age, the
Yeah, Yay. All right, maybe 2 more questions, and then I'm free to talk to you afterwards. And I do have my material up here if anybody has another organization that might be interested in the work that I'm doing. Yes, please.
Could you spell trachomia so I can research it?
Is this a quiz? I can go over there and bring up my Word document and spell it wrong.
Sounds like T-R-I-C.
I'm not certain. T-R-A-C-H, trachomia. I'm probably even saying it wrong. Yeah, I'll put it on a Word document and it will correct it for you. Yes, thank you.
How did Annie Sullivan have time to have many loves and Helen Keller same way?
I don't think I said many. I said we both had loves and love lost.
Okay, so can you fill in a little bit?
Always the love story. I'll come back for Valentine's Day. I'm going to take a minute, and I'm going to take a minute and talk about that because I think it really matters. There was a man named John Macy, and he was a Harvard professor that was brought on to assist Annie in being a tutor for Helen because her school load was so huge. And Annie married John Macy. And they were married for several years, and they were part of a household community together. And then there's no good research or information, only supposition as to what could have happened. But he died quite young, and they were separated but never divorced. And most of the legal documents come off Annie Sullivan Macy. Annie Sullivan Macy. Oh, and you know, I forgot to mention while we were talking about Annie Sullivan was the first woman ever to be buried at the Washington Cathedral. First woman ever. And Helen's buried right next to her. And as I understand, Helen had this sort of bow, and as I understand it, there was some sort of intervention behind the scene, and he went missing. But he didn't really go missing, but they kind of scared him off. So, but she did have this great love, and the both of them did. So there you go. Yes.
I've never been able to understand how Helen Keller could understand really complex concepts. I mean, she just was so brilliant and knew so much. I just don't understand how she could understand so deeply. You know, world things, and just, she was so brilliant.
She is, and if you've ever read her work, or her books are beautiful. She's a very, very beautiful writer. Well, maybe that's just a question we need to end with. How does anybody understand? You know, because I think everybody has more than what they're given credit for. So I'd like to end on that note. I'd be happy to talk to, I don't mean to not answer that question, but that's really the question. How does anybody really understand what it is they have? You know? So thank you once again, and I'm so glad that thank you.